The sun was shining brightly over the small private airport just outside of Los Angeles. It was one of those perfect California days where everything seemed to glow, the kind of day that made people feel optimistic about life. But for the man, walking toward his private jet, this wasn't going to be an ordinary afternoon. This guy had worked harder than most could ever imagine to get where he was in life. Born into a tough neighborhood with little opportunity, he'd clawed his way out through sheer determination and brains. He didn't inherit wealth or connections. Instead, he built them from scratch. His tech company revolutionized how businesses handled logistics, making him millions along the way. And now, here he stood, a symbol of success, wearing a sharp blazer and tailored pants, ready to board his own private plane for a big meeting in New York. As he approached the sleek Gulfstream G650, its polished surface sparkling under the sunlight, you'd think it would have been smooth sailing from there. This was his jet, after all. Paid for by years of sleepless nights, endless hustle, and sacrifices no one else saw. But as fate would have it, things were about to take a turn he never expected. Standing near the steps leading up to the aircraft were two men deep in conversation. One appeared to be the pilot, dressed in uniform, while the other held a clipboard and looked like some sort of official. Neither paid any attention to the owner of the jet as he walked closer. They acted as if they owned the place themselves, completely ignoring the very person who did. "Good afternoon," the man greeted warmly, extending his hand toward the pilot. "I believe we're set for takeoff?" The pilot turned slowly, almost startled by the voice. For a moment there was silence. Then came the response, hesitant, awkward, and laced with discomfort. Sir, I'm sorry, but you can't board this flight." Confusion washed over the man's face. "What do you mean? This is my jet. I own it." The pilot glanced nervously at the clipboard-wielding man beside him before responding. "There seems to be some confusion about ownership. This gentleman here says he needs to verify credentials before anyone boards." At first glance, it sounded reasonable enough. A simple mix-up, right? Except when the man pulled out paperwork proving who he was and showed documentation confirming his ownership of the jet, the reaction wasn't what anyone would call normal. The clipboard guy barely looked at the documents. Instead, he gave a smug smile, clearly unimpressed. "We'll need further verification," he said dismissively. "Protocol, you understand." But the man understood something else entirely. What was happening wasn't about protocol. It was about prejudice. No matter how many papers he showed, nothing seemed good enough for these two. Their refusal to let him board felt personal, intentional, and rooted in bias. Anger bubbled inside him, but he kept his cool. Years of navigating hostile environments taught him patience. So rather than lose his temper, he stepped back, pulled out his phone, and dialed his attorney. If logic wouldn't work, maybe legal muscle would. While waiting for help to arrive, the tension grew thicker. Passengers waiting nearby began noticing the commotion. Some whispered among themselves, others stared openly. A few even recorded snippets on their phones. Word spread quickly around the terminal. Something unusual was unfolding, and everyone wanted to know why. By the time the lawyer arrived, armed with even more proof of ownership, the situation hadn't improved. The clipboard guy continued stalling, trying every excuse possible to delay the inevitable. Finally, cornered by undeniable evidence, he admitted defeat, but not without dragging his feet and throwing in snide remarks along the way. For the man standing there, the whole ordeal was humiliating. Every second wasted arguing over something so absurd chipped away at his dignity. By the end, fury burned in his chest, but he masked it well. Turning to the group blocking his path, he spoke calmly, yet firmly. "You've disrespected me and wasted my time," he said. "Every single person involved will hear from my team. Consider yourselves reported." With that, he climbed aboard his jet, leaving behind stunned faces and scrambling egos. As the engines roared to life, signaling departure, the message was clear. Justice wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The tension at the airport was thick enough to cut with a knife. The man stood there, his jaw tight, trying to keep his composure as the clipboard guy continued to stall. It didn't matter how many documents he showed or how clearly he explained that this was his jet. The other side wasn't budging. Instead, they kept throwing out excuses, each one more ridiculous than the last. "We'll need additional verification," the clipboard guy said smugly, flipping through papers he hadn't even bothered to read properly. His tone dripped with condescension, like he thought he was dealing with someone who wouldn't know how to spell ownership, let alone prove it. The man clenched his fists, but forced himself to stay calm. He knew better than to let frustration get the better of him. Losing control in a situation like this wouldn't help. It would only give these people exactly what they wanted, an excuse to dismiss him further. So instead, he took a deep breath and dialed his attorney again. This time, he made sure the call was on speaker, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Mr. Carter, I'm here now." The lawyer's voice boomed over the phone. "What's going on?" The man turned to the pilot and the clipboard guy, holding up his phone so they could hear too. "These gentlemen seem to think I don't own my own jet. Care to explain why we're still having this conversation?" The clipboard guy shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that the stakes had just gone up. He tried to play it cool, though. "Sir, as I mentioned earlier, we have protocols in place. Nothing personal, it's standard procedure." "Standard procedure?" The man shot back, his voice rising slightly despite his efforts to stay composed. "You've seen my documents. You've heard me confirm ownership multiple times. Yet you're still questioning me. Tell me, does this standard procedure apply to every single person who owns a private jet? Or is it reserved for people who look like me?" That question hung in the air like smoke after a firecracker. Everyone within earshot froze, unsure of what to say next. Even the bystanders watching from afar seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. A few murmured among themselves, while others pulled out their phones to record what was happening. Someone shouted from the crowd, "This is messed up." Another added, "Let him board already." By now, the scene had drawn quite the audience. Ground staff, passengers waiting for other flights, and even some curious pilots gathered around to watch the drama unfold. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some people looked sympathetic, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others wore expressions of anger, muttering about how wrong this whole thing was. And then there were those who simply watched silently, absorbing every detail. Meanwhile, the clipboard guy was starting to sweat. For all his bravado earlier, he clearly hadn't anticipated things escalating this quickly. Now, with cameras rolling and a lawyer on the line, he realized he might be in over his head. Still, he refused to back down completely. "We're just doing our job," he muttered defensively, avoiding eye contact. "If you'd cooperate and provide the necessary information—" "The necessary information?" the man interrupted, his patience wearing thin. "I've given you everything you asked for, and more. What else do you want? My birth certificate, a DNA test, maybe a letter from the president confirming I exist?" His sarcasm drew nervous laughter from the crowd, breaking the tension momentarily. But the underlying frustration was undeniable. Every second wasted arguing over something so absurd felt like salt being rubbed into an open wound. The man glanced at his watch, realizing he was running late for his meeting in New York. Time was ticking away, and these people were making sure he missed it. Finally, the lawyer stepped in, his authoritative voice cutting through the chaos. "Listen carefully," he said, addressing both the clipboard guy and the pilot. "My client has provided ample proof of ownership. Any further delay will be considered obstruction and legal action will follow immediately. Do I make myself clear?" The clipboard guy hesitated, glancing nervously at the pilot. Neither of them wanted to deal with a lawsuit, especially not one involving someone as high profile as this man. After a long pause, the clipboard guy finally relented. "Fine," he muttered reluctantly. "He can board." But it wasn't over yet. As the man turned to walk toward the jet, he stopped mid-step and faced them one last time. "You should know something," he said, his voice steady but laced with steel. "This isn't just about me. This is about the kind of behavior that makes people lose faith in systems that are supposed to protect them. You questioned my legitimacy because of the color of my skin. That's unacceptable. And trust me, this isn't the end of it." With that, he climbed aboard his jet, leaving the clipboard guy and the pilot scrambling to figure out how to clean up the mess they'd created. The engines roared to life, signaling departure, but the crowd below stayed put, buzzing with energy. Phones were still recording, capturing every word and gesture. By the time the plane lifted off the ground, the story was already spreading like wildfire. Back on the tarmac, the clipboard guy looked pale, staring at the empty space where the jet had been moments ago. He whispered something under his breath to the pilot, but neither of them looked particularly confident. They knew they'd crossed a line, and they also knew there would be consequences. As the crowd began to disperse, conversations erupted everywhere. Some praised the man for standing his ground, while others criticized the blatant discrimination they'd witnessed. One woman shook her head sadly as she walked away, muttering, "This is why nothing changes. People still treat others differently, based on how they look." For the man sitting inside the jet, the anger hadn't fully subsided. He stared out the window, watching the city shrink beneath him. He'd faced prejudice before, countless times, but this incident stung differently. It wasn't just about being denied access to his own property. It was about the audacity of these individuals to assume they could treat him however they pleased without consequence. But as much as the anger burned inside him, another emotion bubbled up alongside it: determination. He knew this moment wasn't just about him. It was bigger than that. This was an opportunity to shine a light on the systemic issues that still plagued society. If handled correctly, this could spark real change, not just for him, but for countless others who faced similar injustices every day. And so, as the plane soared higher into the sky, he made a silent promise to himself. This wasn't going to be swept under the rug. These people weren't going to get away with it. Whatever it took, he was going to hold them accountable and use this experience to push for progress. Little did he know, the fallout from this incident was only beginning. By the time he woke up the next morning, the story had exploded far beyond what anyone could have predicted. News outlets were running headlines about the incident, and talk shows were debating whether this was an isolated case or a reflection of deeper issues within the aviation industry. Social media was ablaze with discussions, opinions, and calls for accountability. The video of the confrontation at the airport had millions of views, and people weren't holding back in their reactions. For him, it was surreal. One moment, he was just another successful individual going about his day. The next, he was thrust into the spotlight as a symbol of resilience against prejudice. His phone buzzed non-stop with notifications, messages from friends, family, colleagues, and even strangers offering support. Some shared their own stories of facing discrimination, while others simply thanked him for standing firm in a situation that would have shaken most people to their core. Despite the outpouring of encouragement, he couldn't shake off the frustration simmering inside him. He knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It was bigger than that. It was about every person who'd ever been made to feel small because of the color of their skin, their accent, or where they came from. This wasn't just his fight. It was everyone's fight. Later that afternoon, after finishing up his meeting in New York, he sat down with his team to figure out the next steps. They all agreed on one thing: silence wasn't an option. If they wanted real change, they needed to push hard, not only for justice in this specific case, but also to send a message to industries that allowed such behavior to happen unchecked. His lawyer laid out a plan. First, they would file a formal complaint against the leasing company responsible for managing the jet's operations. Second, they would demand transparency, full investigations into how something like this could even occur. Finally, they would make it clear that half-hearted apologies wouldn't cut it. Anyone involved in the incident needed to face consequences. The leasing company must have seen the writing on the wall, because by evening they released a public statement. "We regret any inconvenience caused," it read. "This unfortunate event was due to a misunderstanding, and we are committed to ensuring such incidents do not happen again." But the man wasn't satisfied. A misunderstanding. That Word felt like an insult. What happened wasn't a simple mix-up, it was discrimination, plain and simple. And brushing it aside with vague promises of improvement wasn't going to fix anything. He decided to take things further. Through his lawyer, he sent a strongly worded letter to the leasing company. In it, he outlined exactly what he expected: immediate firings of those directly involved, mandatory diversity training for all employees, and a pledge to increase representation of minority groups within leadership roles. Anything less, he warned, would result in legal action. Meanwhile, the fallout continued to ripple outward. The junior executive who had questioned his ownership, the clipboard guy, was scrambling to save face. According to insiders, he had tried reaching out privately to apologize, but his attempts were ignored. Publicly, though, he doubled down on his earlier stance, claiming he was simply following protocol. "I was doing my job," he reportedly told colleagues. "If there's blame here, it doesn't lie solely with me." That excuse didn't sit well with many people. Critics pointed out that protocol shouldn't include treating someone differently based on stereotypes. Others argued that if this was truly how things operated, then the entire system needed an overhaul. Either way, the executive quickly became a target of ridicule online. Memes mocking his smug demeanor flooded social media, and soon enough, his name was trending alongside hashtags calling for his resignation. As pressure mounted, the leasing company began distancing itself from him. Within days, they announced his termination, citing a breach of conduct. But they didn't stop there. Several other employees connected to the incident were suspended pending investigation. Among them was the pilot, the man who had initially refused to let him board despite knowing full well whose jet it was. The pilot's firing drew mixed reactions. Some people thought it was harsh, arguing that he was simply following orders. Others believed it was justified, pointing out that his hesitation spoke volumes about his judgment, or lack thereof. Regardless of where people stood, one thing was certain: no one involved walked away unscathed. While the drama unfolded publicly, the man found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. It wasn't easy being at the center of so much attention. For every supportive comment there were trolls spewing hate. For every call for justice, there were critics dismissing the incident as overblown. Despite the noise, he remained focused on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about punishing individuals. It was about creating lasting change. He started thinking about ways to turn this negative experience into something positive. Maybe it was time to use his platform for more than just business success. Perhaps he could channel his resources and influence into initiatives aimed at breaking down barriers for underrepresented communities. Ideas began swirling in his mind: mentorship programs, scholarships, partnerships with advocacy groups, all designed to uplift others who might find themselves facing similar challenges. But before diving headfirst into those plans, he knew he needed closure. Justice mattered, not just for him but for everyone watching. Until the leasing company took meaningful action, the wound would remain open. So he waited, biding his time, knowing that patience was key in moments like these. By the end of the week, the leasing company issued another statement. This time it was more direct. "We deeply regret the harm caused by our employees' actions," it read. "We are taking decisive measures to ensure accountability and prevent future occurrences." Alongside the statement, they listed several policy changes, including mandatory bias training, increased hiring of diverse candidates, and regular audits to track progress. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. For the man at the center of it all, it felt like a small victory, a step in the right direction. Still, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Change rarely came overnight, especially when it required dismantling systems built on years of inequality. As he prepared to return home, he couldn't help but think about the lessons learned during this ordeal. Humiliation, anger, frustration, they were emotions he hoped no one else would have to endure. But if sharing his story could spark conversations, inspire action, and bring about reform, then maybe it was worth it. After all, sometimes the hardest battles lead to the greatest victories. And with that thought, he boarded his jet once again, ready to face whatever came next. The weeks following the incident were a whirlwind. The man found himself in the spotlight, not just as a successful entrepreneur, but as a voice for change. Every interview request, every article written about him, and every social media post tied to his story reinforced one undeniable truth. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It had become a rallying cry for anyone who'd ever faced discrimination or prejudice. He began appearing on major news programs, sitting across from anchors who asked thoughtful and sometimes tough questions. How does it feel to be treated this way when you've worked so hard to get where you are? One interviewer asked. It's frustrating, he replied honestly, leaning forward slightly in his chair. You know, I didn't grow up with privilege. Everything I have today is because of years of hard work, sacrifices, and sleepless nights. When someone questions my legitimacy, not based on facts but assumptions, it's like they're dismissing all that effort. It's dehumanizing. His words resonated deeply with viewers. People flooded comment sections and social media threads, sharing their own experiences of being underestimated or disrespected simply because of how they looked, spoke, or carried themselves. For many, his story was a mirror reflecting their own struggles. And for those who hadn't faced such challenges, it opened their eyes to realities they might not have considered before. As the public discourse grew louder, the man realized he had an opportunity to turn pain into purpose. He started thinking bigger than just holding individuals accountable. What if he could use this moment to push for systemic change, to create opportunities for others who might otherwise be overlooked? One evening, after another long day of meetings and interviews, he sat down with his team to brainstorm ideas. They tossed around concepts for initiatives aimed at increasing diversity and inclusion within industries known for exclusivity, like aviation. Someone suggested launching a mentorship program specifically for young professionals from underrepresented communities. Another pitched the idea of partnering with advocacy groups to fund scholarships for students pursuing careers in STEM fields. By the end of the meeting, they had a plan. Over the next few months, the man would channel part of his earnings into creating a foundation focused on empowering marginalized voices. The goal wasn't just financial support. It was about providing guidance, resources, and access to networks that could help people break through barriers. But even as he worked tirelessly behind the scenes, he couldn't ignore the human element of what had happened. One person in particular kept coming back to his mind: the pilot. The man knew the pilot hadn't acted alone. He was caught between orders and his own biases. Still, his hesitation during that crucial moment stung. It wasn't just about refusing entry. It was about failing to see past stereotypes and recognize the humanity standing right in front of him. Then, unexpectedly, a letter arrived. Handwritten and heartfelt, it was from the fired pilot. In it, the pilot admitted his mistakes, acknowledging that fear of losing his job had clouded his judgment. He expressed regret for not standing up against the discriminatory behavior he witnessed, and apologized sincerely for contributing to the humiliation. Reading the letter, the man felt conflicted. On one hand, anger still lingered. How could someone in a position of authority let bias dictate their actions? But on the other hand, he understood the weight of regret. Everyone made mistakes, and everyone deserved a chance to learn from them, if they were truly willing to change. After some thought, he decided to respond. His reply was measured but firm. "I accept your apology," he wrote, "but words aren't enough. If you genuinely want to make amends, commit to educating yourself and becoming an ally. Only then can real growth happen." To everyone's surprise, including his own, he offered the pilot a second chance, but with conditions. First, the pilot would need to complete sensitivity training and workshops on racial bias. Second, he would have to actively participate in efforts to promote inclusivity within the aviation industry. Lastly, he would agree to speak publicly about his experience, using it as a teaching moment for others. The pilot accepted the offer, without hesitation. Grateful for the opportunity, he threw himself into the process, attending seminars, reading books, and engaging in conversations that challenged his perspectives. Slowly but surely, he began transforming, not just as a professional, but as a person. Meanwhile, the leasing company continued its efforts to rebuild its reputation. True to their promises, they implemented new policies designed to address bias and improve accountability. Employees underwent mandatory diversity training, and recruitment practices were revamped to prioritize inclusivity. While skeptics remained cautious, watching closely to ensure these changes weren't just performative, early signs suggested progress. For the man, seeing tangible action gave him a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. He knew true transformation took time, and he vowed to stay involved, holding them accountable every step of the way. As the dust settled, he reflected on everything that had transpired. The incident had been painful, yes, but it had also been transformative. It forced him to confront uncomfortable truths, not just about society, but about himself. He learned the importance of resilience, the power of forgiveness, and the impact of leading by example. And perhaps most importantly, he discovered a renewed sense of purpose. Fighting for justice wasn't just about calling out wrongdoing. It was about building bridges, fostering understanding, and creating spaces where everyone could thrive. With his foundation taking shape and plans underway to expand its reach, he felt hopeful for the future. Change wouldn't come overnight, but with persistence and collaboration, it was possible. And as he looked ahead, he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't stop until he saw real, lasting progress. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't just about him. It was about paving the way for generations to come. Months had passed since the incident at the airport, but its ripple effects continued to shape lives. Not just for the man who had been denied boarding his own jet, but for countless others who found themselves inspired by his story. What started as a humiliating experience had evolved into something far greater, a movement aimed at breaking down barriers and fostering inclusivity in places where it was desperately needed. The man's foundation was officially launched during this time, and it quickly gained traction. Named after the core values he believed in, equality, opportunity, and resilience, the organization became a beacon of hope for underrepresented communities. Its mission was clear: to provide resources, mentorship, and advocacy for individuals striving to overcome systemic obstacles. From funding scholarships for students pursuing careers in aviation to hosting workshops on leadership and bias training, the foundation tackled issues head-on, addressing both the symptoms and root causes of discrimination. One of the first initiatives, rolled out through the foundation, was a mentorship program designed specifically for young professionals from marginalized backgrounds. These aspiring pilots, engineers, and aviation executives were paired with experienced mentors who not only shared technical knowledge, but also offered guidance on navigating an industry riddled with exclusivity. For many participants, having someone believe in their potential made all the difference. Take, for example, a young woman from a low-income neighborhood who dreamed of becoming a pilot. Growing up, she rarely saw anyone who looked like her in that role. Doubts crept in, fueled by societal expectations and limited access to opportunities. But when she joined the mentorship program, everything changed. Her mentor, a seasoned captain who had faced similar challenges early in her career, helped her build confidence, secure internships, and eventually land a spot in flight school. Stories like hers weren't uncommon. They were proof that representation mattered and that support could unlock doors once thought impossible to open. While the foundation worked tirelessly to empower others, the man stayed committed to holding institutions accountable. He maintained regular communication with the leasing company responsible for managing his jet, ensuring they followed through on their promises. Progress reports, policy updates, and employee testimonials became part of his routine check-ins. Though skepticism lingered among critics, there was no denying the changes taking place within the organization. For instance, the company introduced blind recruitment processes to reduce unconscious bias during hiring. They also implemented quarterly diversity audits, publishing results publicly to maintain transparency. Employees participated in ongoing training sessions focused not just on recognizing prejudice, but actively combating it. Slowly but surely, the culture began shifting, from one rooted in exclusion to one embracing inclusion. But accountability wasn't limited to corporate settings. The man also used his platform to call out discriminatory practices across the broader aviation industry. In interviews and op-eds, he highlighted glaring disparities such as the lack of diversity among pilots, air traffic controllers, and senior management teams. This isn't just about numbers, he emphasized. It's about creating environments where everyone feels valued and respected. Until we see meaningful change, we're failing. His words resonated deeply, sparking conversations at conferences, panel discussions, and even legislative hearings. Lawmakers began exploring ways to incentivize diversity within federally regulated industries, while advocacy groups amplified their efforts to push for reform. The momentum was undeniable, and the man took pride in knowing he'd played a role in igniting it. Amidst all the progress, however, personal growth remained a central theme for those directly involved in the incident. Take the pilot, for example. After completing sensitivity training and immersing himself in workshops on racial bias, he emerged with a newfound perspective. His journey wasn't easy. It required confronting uncomfortable truths about privilege and prejudice, but it transformed him in profound ways. He started volunteering with youth aviation programs, sharing his experiences openly, and encouraging kids to dream big regardless of their circumstances. During one session, he recounted the moment he hesitated to stand up for what was right, admitting how ashamed he felt afterward. "I let fear dictate my actions," he told the group. "But I've learned that silence can be just as harmful as discrimination itself. If you see something wrong, speak up. Be brave enough to do better." His honesty struck a chord with listeners, especially the younger ones. Many approached him afterward, asking questions and seeking advice. Watching him interact with these kids reminded the man of why second chances mattered. Redemption wasn't just about apologizing. It was about making amends and using your voice to uplift others. Even the clipboard-wielding executive, whose arrogance had sparked much of the controversy, seemed to undergo a transformation. After losing his job, he struggled to find work in the aviation industry. Rejection after rejection forced him to confront the consequences of his actions. Eventually, he reached out to the man again, this time not with excuses but with a genuine desire to understand. "I messed up," he admitted during a phone call. "Not just because I questioned your ownership, but because I failed to treat you with basic human decency. I want to learn how to do better." Though wary, the man agreed to meet him for coffee. Their conversation was raw and honest, touching on topics ranging from implicit bias to the importance of empathy. By the end of it, they parted ways with a mutual understanding. Mistakes don't define us. Our willingness to grow does. As the months turned into a year, the man reflected on how much had changed, not just externally but internally. The incident had tested his patience, challenged his beliefs, and pushed him to reevaluate his purpose. At times, the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. How could one person possibly make a dent in centuries-old systems of inequality? Yet he reminded himself that every step forward counted, no matter how small. He often thought about the lessons he'd learned along the way. Resilience, for one, had proven invaluable. There were moments when giving up would have been easier, but pushing through taught him the power of perseverance. Forgiveness, too, had been transformative, not as a way to excuse wrongdoing, but as a path toward healing and unity. And collaboration showed him that real change required collective effort, not individual heroics. Most importantly, he realized that justice wasn't a destination, it was a journey. Holding people accountable was crucial, but so was offering grace and opportunities for growth. It was a delicate balance, one that demanded constant reflection and adaptation. Looking ahead, the man felt hopeful. Challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, but he was prepared to face them. Through his foundation, advocacy work, and unwavering commitment to equality, he hoped to leave a legacy that extended far beyond his lifetime. This wasn't just about fixing broken systems. It was about building new ones, ones built on fairness, respect, and humanity. And as he boarded his jet once more, ready to embark on another adventure, he carried with him the knowledge that true power lies not in titles or wealth, but in the ability to inspire change. Even in the face of adversity, light could shine through, if only we chose to let it. The man's journey had come full circle. From the humiliating moment at the airport to the transformative impact his actions sparked, he had traveled a long road, both literally and figuratively. But as he sat in his private jet once again, this time heading back to Los Angeles for a milestone event hosted by his foundation, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude not just for where he was now, but for how far he'd come, and how many others were walking alongside him. The event was set to be a celebration, a gathering of mentors, mentees, advocates, and allies who had all played a part in turning pain into purpose. It wasn't about him. It was about the collective effort of everyone involved. As the plane descended into the city where it all began, memories flooded his mind. The sting of rejection, the weight of public scrutiny, the exhausting fight for accountability. All of it had shaped him in ways he never imagined. When he stepped off the jet, cameras flashed and cheers erupted from a crowd waiting eagerly outside the terminal. Supporters held signs that read, "Justice through action and equality starts here." For a brief moment he paused, taking it all in. This wasn't just a victory lap. It was proof that standing up against injustice could inspire change. And while he knew there was still so much work to do, seeing the tangible results gave him hope. Inside the venue, an expansive hall decorated with banners celebrating diversity and resilience, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Hundreds of people filled the space, representing different walks of life, backgrounds, and dreams. Some were graduates of the mentorship program, proudly wearing uniforms or badges indicating their new roles in aviation. Others were industry leaders who had joined forces with the foundation to create internship pipelines and scholarships. There were also families, parents holding hands with children whose eyes sparkled with ambition, inspired by stories of possibility. The man took the stage to thunderous applause. He smiled warmly, scanning the crowd before beginning his speech. "When I walked into that airport months ago," he started, his voice steady yet emotional, "I didn't expect to leave with anything more than frustration. Instead, I found a community, a group of people determined to turn adversity into opportunity." He spoke candidly about the challenges they'd faced together, how they'd fought not only for accountability, but for systemic reform, how they'd turned outrage into action, creating programs that opened doors previously closed to so many. His words resonated deeply because they weren't just rhetoric. They were rooted in real experiences, shared struggles, and hard-won victories. But what struck a chord most was when he shifted focus to forgiveness and redemption. "Change isn't easy," he said, pausing to let the weight of his words sink in. "It requires us to confront uncomfortable truths, not just about others, but about ourselves. We can demand justice without losing sight of humanity. We can hold people accountable while giving them chances to grow." He pointed out two individuals sitting near the front row, the pilot and the former executive. Both had been invited to attend the event, not as tokens of forgiveness, but as symbols of progress. Their presence reminded everyone that even those who make mistakes can contribute positively, if given the tools and opportunities to do so. The pilot stood briefly to acknowledge the applause, visibly humbled. Since completing his sensitivity, training and embracing advocacy work, he had become an outspoken champion for inclusivity within the aviation world. Earlier that week, he delivered a powerful keynote at a national conference, urging fellow professionals to challenge biases and create welcoming environments. As for the former executive, his transformation was quieter but no less impactful. After months of struggling to find employment, he volunteered extensively with nonprofit organizations focused on workforce equity. Though his reputation remained tarnished, his willingness to learn and adapt earned him respect among peers. When asked why he persisted despite setbacks, he simply replied, "Because I owe it to myself and to others to do better." Later that evening, during a panel discussion featuring several beneficiaries of the Foundation's initiatives, the room fell silent as a young man named Alex took the microphone. Barely 20 years old, Alex had grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes and schools without stability. Aviation had always been his dream, but financial barriers made it seem impossible. That is, until he discovered the mentorship program. "I never thought someone like me could fly planes," Alex admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "But then I met my mentor and everything changed. She didn't just teach me about flying, she taught me to believe in myself. Now, thanks to her guidance and this foundation, I'm enrolled in flight school. One day I'll be up there." He gestured toward the sky. "And I'll think about everyone here who helped me get there." Tears welled in the eyes of many attendees, including the man himself. Moments like these reminded him why every sleepless night, every difficult decision, every ounce of effort had been worth it. Change wasn't measured in headlines or hashtags. It was measured in lives transformed. After the formal program ended, guests mingled over refreshments, sharing stories and exchanging contact information. A young girl tugged at the man's sleeve, holding out a drawing she'd made earlier. In the picture, a plane soared high above colorful buildings with stick figures waving below. "This is you," she said shyly, pointing to one of the figures. "You're helping people fly." Her innocence brought laughter and warmth to the moment. Kneeling down to her level, the man thanked her sincerely. "And maybe one day," he told her, "you'll be flying too. Don't ever stop dreaming." Driving home late that night, exhausted but fulfilled, the man reflected on the day's events. He thought about the connections forged, the lessons learned, and the countless possibilities ahead. While the scars of the past would always remain, they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as reminders of resilience, courage, and the power of collective action. In the end, he realized something profound. True success wasn't about wealth or accolades. It was about leaving the world better than you found it. By fighting for justice, not just for himself but for others, he had done exactly that. And though the journey was far from over, he felt ready to face whatever came next. Because sometimes, the greatest victories aren't personal triumphs. They're moments when you see others rise, knowing you played a small part in lifting them higher.